everyone. It's Paul and Sasan, Proteus Academy, and today, for the first time ever, kind of the first time ever, we've actually talked to a lot of people and just keep not putting out the videos. We swear to God this one's gonna happen, though. We are here with Jack Johnson from Blake, and
Hi there.
if you somehow know who we are, but don't know who won the last two TOCs in public forum, thanks.
Yeah,
But
welcome.
yeah, welcome so
Yeah,
much. Thanks for being here, dude. This is weird.
it's great to be here. As I was just telling you guys, I actually used to watch your videos when I was debating and like coming up when I was younger, the like round analyses and stuff. So yeah, great to finally be here. It came full circle in like kind of like a weird way, but it's great to be here.
That's awesome. Well, I was hoping we could start with kind of what you just alluded to, right? So, how'd you start with debate? Did you do it in middle school or did you start in high school?
I started in high school, so I started freshman year. So I had the privilege of being able to go to Blake, which has a fantastic debate history and program. We've had like a debate team for like 100 years or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so because of that advantage, Blake has this thing where in freshman year you have to take like an art credit, right? And like I am like absolutely god awful at all things related to like actual art. And so for some reason, the class that my old coach, Shane Stafford, teaches, argumentation debate, is considered as like an art credit. So like you can take that. And so I just took that, and my parents are like lawyers, and so I was comfortable arguing naturally. And so, yeah, I just figured out that I liked it. And just from there, I kind of like caught the bug, got really into it, started watching videos. And yeah, there was like no turning back, forfeited all my weekends by like the second year, I was prepping all the time. So yeah, it wasn't like there was never really much of a conscious decision I made that I was like gonna get really big into debate. It just kind of like happened as I realized that I really enjoyed the activity.
So that makes real quick, Sasan. That makes me wonder. Me and Sasan talk about first tournament experiences a lot. First tournament I ever went to, I won my first round, and I remember I audibly said this. I was talking to my partner, and I'm like, dude, I knew I'd be good at this. Like, yeah, debate's not even hard. Like, I argue a lot. I argue with people all the time. And then got destroyed 5 rounds in a row at that tournament. Well, 1-5. Next tournament went 0-6, right? But for me, I still knew. Like, I knew at the end of that first tournament, after getting just stomped 5 rounds in a row, I'm like, I love this. And so I want to know, like, you said you got into it and you just started in high school. So, like, what happened at your first tournament, and, like, what was your reaction to that?
Yeah, good question. I haven't thought about this in forever, but my first ever tournament was this local tournament. And I was partners with this kid who's this hilarious guy. He like didn't continue with debate, but he's like this really smart guy. And we actually like wound up doing really well. I think we got like we definitely placed, I think, like top 10. I think I got like a speaker award, but obviously that was like novice. So like this wasn't like, against varsity debaters. So that was my first tournament. And I remember it because I like met a bunch of like random people. And I think that also contributed to me staying in the community. It was just like, I felt like there were so many interesting people that, I could connect with and talk with. And so that like I really felt like super welcoming environment, and that kind of influenced me to stay. However, my other first tournament experience, which really more felt like my first tournament because it was like a varsity tournament, and my real first tournament, the first novice tournament of the year, people like barely have any idea what they're doing, right? So like this was different though. This was the next month, my first ever varsity tournament. And I was a first speaker at this point. I was a first speaker at this point in my novice year. And so I didn't really know what was going on. And I had this thing where I thought it was super tight, super persuasive to give a mostly pre-written summary. So I would literally just get up there in my summary and just spend 40 to 50 seconds just basically just reciting like a persuasively written essay about my case, right? And so this was all well and good. I think we somehow were like 3-2 or something. And then we hit this team that I think they were from Evanston. And this team was like really good. Like everyone knew who they were. They were like amazingly good. And so I'm like scared, but I'm like fighting. I'm trying to survive. So I get up there for my summary and I get my little pre-written intro thing, right? And the Evanston debater gets up in the next speech and goes, judge, just because he repeats all of his impacts for 40 seconds at the top of his speech doesn't mean he actually gets those impacts. Let's talk about the dropped turns. And then the judge just starts laughing. So that was my introduction to varsity debate. I was like, oh God, so that was kind of when I think started to understand a little bit more like the clash element of debate, like up until that point, I was kind of taking like the layman's approach to it, where I was like, oh, I just need to be like persuasive. And to be fair, that worked because most of my tournaments I had been to were local tournaments. So it was mostly, like parent judges, flay judges. But from there, I was like, oh God, there are some people that like understand this a lot better than I do. So that I think was one of my most pivotal experiences. I mean, we just got rocked in that round and I learned a lot. So
I love those. I love those so much.
Paul competed at a school that rarely lets anyone compete in novice. They're like, look, you're going to be here for a long time. May as well just figure out what this activity is. And we're now both coaching at a community college where people only have 2 years. And oftentimes that's like they start in the beginning of the 2 years. They're done at the end of the 2 years. And so I'm kind of curious about what you said about doing varsity in your first month. I wonder, how common do you think that is, and what led to you? Is that like standard for your school, or was that something you wanted to do?
Yeah, it's sort of like semi-standard. It's not like super common. It's definitely only available for like teams that are more into debate. But I think that basically what happened novice year is that I competed in mostly novice tournaments. But I also would, do like varsity tournaments here and there. So like I competed at Blake, for example. And because of that, I think that it was really helpful because I got to have some of the experience against much tougher opponents that, obviously we would get smacked by anyone that knew what they were doing at this point. But it was nice because on the one hand, I had sort of like the easier tournaments where I could like sort of hone my skills. And also I got to see what not to do in a lot of those instances. And then I kind of mixed that with certain varsity opportunities that let me see like, this is what I should be aspiring to, So I think that personally, I think the way I did it, of course I'm biased because like it's my experience, of course, but I think the way I did it is like the best way that I can think of to do it. Because I think that both types of experience, the experience where you're just against newbies, people on your own level, that can be valuable. And I think also getting your teeth kicked in can be valuable too.
So on that subject, as I said, so just for the record, that tournament where I won 1-5 wasn't novice. It was just that bad, right? And so was that other tournament where I got stomped. But my third tournament ever, there was an open debater on our team, and his partner dropped out, and it was at the Paul Winners Invitational, which at this time was like the third hardest tournament in the nation. And they're like, hey, can anyone go with them? And I was like, yeah. I was kind of like you, where I was like, yeah, like I like novice and whatnot, but like I want to see like the real stuff, or like hit harder people to like kind of have like that like hyperbolic time chamber, like Goku training weight type, like make it really hard so that when I go back to novice, it'll be easy. Didn't get to go back to novice, so it didn't get. But what I really wanted to ask about in that sense is, this is something that I've said a lot of times. Sasan, as far as I'm aware, still agrees with this statement. In my perception of debate, in terms of levels, right? A day one novice and a day one varsity or open level, we call it open in college. I know in high school a lot of the times they call it varsity. But the difference between that and the difference between someone who is in their first open tournament, right? They've competed maybe for a semester or a year, and like, I don't know, like you basically, right? Like the sort of peak of the event, a top 5 certainly debater in the activity, is like way bigger than like day one novice. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. Like, do you think that there just is this exponential sort of, I don't know, growth curve, whatever you want to say, where it really becomes clear at a certain point, especially when you're traveling the national circuit like it seems like you do, that there's like clear levels. Like it's weird almost that there's one division for 80% of people when there's like this 5% that just has nothing seemingly in common with the rest of them. Or what was your perception of that in terms of like in PF at least?
That's a really interesting question. I think that it's kind of hard to determine the way in which most people improve. I honestly don't think that it's like linear, and I also don't think it's exponential. I feel like for me it was like sort of like a squiggly line where there would just be sort of like random points where like different concepts would kind of click, right? I remember, I think the first year I had the privilege of being able to attend NDF, I think 2 times. And my first year at NDF was when weighing really clicked. I think that most people coming out of Blake before then, and even honestly, just like in PF before then, weighing hadn't become as much of a staple as it is now. Like it really wasn't the case where everybody's paradigm was like begging you to weigh when I was a freshman and sophomore. And I think a lot of that also was that on my team and also I think on the Minnesota local circuit, there's a much greater deal of influence from like, tech formats, so LD policy, et cetera. And they don't really weigh in the same way like we do. You don't really hear like a LD debater saying we outweigh on scope and reversibility and probability and with like, 10-second explanations, right? So I think that just to actually answer your question, I think that for me, improvement is kind of like a squiggly line because there are just random points where you really kind of have an experience or like dig into a concept and it makes you a lot more comfortable engaging in and winning other rounds that unfold in different ways than your past ones have. And for me, I think the biggest difference that led to me being a lot more successful was when I understood weighing. And I know with other people, they understand frontlining or they understand like collapsing strategy. And then from there, you kind of can have deeper debates and then you can learn more about like different situations. So, I think improvement is really unpredictable because I also know people that, debated freshman year and got like bids. And then from there, it was kind of like flatlining, right? So it's a bit unpredictable, honestly. It's kind of like it's a very, it's a difficult thing to gauge, like the way improvement occurs. And it almost seems random at times. But the best thing, if I had to give any advice in that area, I'd say the biggest thing you can do is to maximize your opportunities for improvement, right? Like constantly giving redos, constantly taking criticism, super important. Then that'll make you, I think, a lot more likely to have those little instances in which something clicks. And that's really what did it for me.
One of the interesting things that you touched on just now to me about public forum is the way public forum was formed was very much like, well, we know what we don't want to be. We want to kind of create something else, right? And we're not policy. We're not LD. And that's cool in a lot of ways. There's a lot of stuff about the kind of techier formats that I don't think is good or I don't think is for everyone. But what I think is interesting is the current, in the last few years, trend of, as you were saying, like learning from other formats, right? And adopting some of those strategies. Some of those arguments are becoming more common now. So my question is, to what degree, in your case, was the influence from other debate formats like intentional? Like, did you, like, how did you explore those ideas? Did you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question. I think that at first it was purely unintentional. Like freshman and probably the first half of sophomore year, I wasn't really aware of the ways I was being influenced by these different formats that most people on the circuit weren't. I really just wasn't aware of it. But I did have this moment, I think halfway through sophomore year, where I think at practice, we're learning about like critiques and theory and like different sorts of progressive arguments. And I pretty much learned that like my like coaching staff has a ton of amazing knowledge about these sorts of arguments. Like my coach Christian did LD, and Shane Stafford like invented the critique. So I was in this really lucky position, honestly, where I realized that, hey, I can like lean into this and I can not only make sure that I don't lose these rounds, but I can use them to my advantage. And so I then attempted to learn theory and use it to my advantage at the TOC sophomore year. I ran paraphrasing bad theory, and it was a disaster. I was a complete idiot about it. I ran it in front of judges who coach teams that paraphrase, and also a judge that explicitly says that he doesn't like theory. I think I ran it 4 times. I lost like either 2 or 3 of the rounds. Didn't go well. But I'm kind of glad I did it because it did teach me the lesson that like, while it is, really useful to use progressive arguments, at this point in the evolution of the format, it has to be very sparingly if you want to maximize your chances of winning. It isn't, I mean, maybe this year on the circuit and like elims at circuit tournaments with like, I think things have become even more technical. But certainly when I was competing junior year, sophomore year, and probably senior year too, you really had to be sparing about like where you chose to run these arguments.
If I can,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to follow up on that in with another question, which is something that I see people talk about, like judges, right? Like right now on like the debate subreddit, right? You'll see a lot of posts complaining about judges. And yeah, you know, a lot of times they're too lay or too whatever. But what's interesting to me about the public forum circuit right now is, okay, you want judges that know a lot about debate, so they can't be lay or flay or whatever, right? But also public forum has changed so much so recently that even people we know who were exceptional public forum debaters 5 years ago maybe like wouldn't really be the judges that the current circuit is looking for. So
For sure.
how do you navigate that as someone who's trying to pioneer things within the format where you don't have the judges from a public forum background that sort of get that or are used to that, right? Because it seems like with policy or LD judges, if you're taking influence from those formats, you can navigate that. But how do you navigate that with people who haven't personally done that?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that kind of ties back into what we were just talking about a bit, because I think that the best thing about PF that makes it so unique and so fun is the diversity in judging. Because I think the fact that PF forces you to know how to persuade like a mom who's never judged the event, and how to persuade Shane Stafford, who's been judging policy rounds for like 30 years. I think that that's, you know, one of the best parts of the event, and it leaves you with so much more knowledge and like grasp of how arguments work, and particularly in terms of helping teams navigate that. I think that one thing I would do if I was trying to improve is I would like explicitly force myself to be in situations where I'm not just debating in my comfort zone, you know? Like I wouldn't just go to the most technical national circuit tournaments and, you know, pref out every lay judge, you know, and do these sorts of things, because in reality, even on the national circuit, TOC, especially I think junior year, we had like 3 parent judges in prelims. Like if you want to be really successful on the national circuit, you have to be able to win lay, flay, and tech debates. Like there's no other way around it. And for me, the Minnesota circuit, the local circuit, they're interesting because they are a traditional debate, or they're of a traditional debate background, which a lot of the time is like people who have coached policy for like 30 years, but like hate the idea that PF is turning into policy. It's like those types of judges. And so that forces you to get good at being persuasive as well as being really technical. So I think that, you know, just exposing yourself to a different variety of judging whenever possible, you know, like not skipping all your locals, you know, I think that's really helpful to help teams navigate that, you know, unpredictable diversity of judges.
I think like you're hitting on something that obviously we've said a lot, but at the end of the day, it's all persuasion. Like that's all the entire activity is. It's get them to sign your name or circle your name, like where they're required to. And some people are persuaded by like, you know, your classic like pathos, ethos, logos, like he's talking pretty and he's dressed nice. And other people are persuaded by a technical analysis of the flow and all that kind of stuff. But I virtually never see people complaining that the judge was like, they were too in the flow. Like, they didn't get, like, the meta-narrative occurring in the debate. Like, clearly there's, like, a thesis of one side that is superior to the other. It's only complaining about lay judges. And I wanted to hear your perspective on, in terms of that, like, when you did have issues, if there was any kind of judges you found harder to get. Was it easier for you to get lay? Was it easier for you to get to flow? What challenges or I don't know skill did you have with specific types of judges, and how did that help you throughout the career?
Yeah. So I think that I've always been someone that was more comfortable in tech debates. I mean, that was certainly where I felt like my bread and butter was, and you know, it's because like we've talked about, I had that sort of like coaching available to me, and that's like kind of how I learned and like understood debate. But I think that my most challenging type of rounds were the lay/traditional rounds that are so frequent on the local Minnesota circuit. I think that that was where I was the worst at. And the reason is that if it's just straight up tell a prettier story than the other team, relate more to their sympathies, that's what gets you the parent judge, right? And I also did World Schools debate, and I was on Team USA junior and senior year, and that really helped me with, getting the lay. But the flay, the traditional coach who's like is a coach and has some usually very specific idea of what they want debate to look like, they can be in a lot of cases the least predictable, right? Because a lot of the time since they like know about debate, they'll latch on to something that seems really arbitrary to me, but is like super important to them. So like, for example, one time I think this was, might've been like districts at Minnesota, like it's, the qualifiers for state. And we were reading this like scenario. It was some war scenario. And the judge, like the contextualization of our impact wasn't mentioned the entire round, but the entire RFD was just like roasting us for not fully contextualizing our impact scenario. And so from there, I got to thinking, I was like why, like, what can I possibly do about like this type of judge that seems to just latch on to anything at random? And so once I got to thinking there, it kind of like resulted that I started to realize that the most important thing for a flay or traditional judge is to sound reasonable. To them, I think that the most important consideration is like the probability and feasibility of your argument, because a lot of them approach debate with the idea and the knowledge of, I saw what high magnitude, basically I saw what magnitude times probability, infinite magnitude. I saw what that narrative did to policy debate. It led to spreading and all sorts of crazy shenanigans. And so they reject that narrative. And so instead what they like is reasonable sounding, plausible, feasible arguments. And so I think that if you kind of harp more on that and tilt less towards explaining why your impact scenario is guaranteed to end the world, I think that really can help you get that type of judge. Because in my experience, that's what that type of judge is looking for a lot of the time. Another thing that really helped me with those types of judge, and this also is true for lay judges, is just a lot of background knowledge on the topic, seeming knowledgeable. Because again, these judges, there is a substantial degree of subjectivity in their decisions as well. Very substantial. Sometimes it feels more substantial than a lay judge. And, one of the best things to diffuse that is to just come off as credible, like have an answer that is like good sounding to every concern the other team raises, so, just seem on top of it and prove probability. That would be my advice for that type of judge.
I have a kind of staying on the theme of like debate strategy questions before maybe we ask a couple questions about like your personal experiences. Cool. In speech, well, because we are in a full service program, right? And our competitors do speech and debate, and they do multiple formats of debate. And I don't know how common it is. It sounds like you had the opportunity to do World Schools and gained a lot and brought that back. But I don't imagine.
I've actually basically never heard anyone say that actually before. That at the high school level, they competed like simultaneously in multiple formats. That's really cool. Which
is something that's huge for our college kids, right? That doing other formats, you just bring your skill sets from the other ones over. But one of the things in speech that we talk about is that being the best at the tournament isn't necessarily about being the best in any one round, right? Like if you go to the college national championships in speech and do a bunch of events and you take a 2 in every single round, you are going to be the top speaker of the tournament. And if you are in a final and you take a 1-1-5 and somebody else takes a 2-2-2, like they win and you lose. And the lesson behind that is that it's not so much about being the best in any one particular skill. It's about not giving anyone any reason to hate you. Like, you're maybe not their favorite ever, but they can't really point to any one thing and say, this is what skill or what trait or whatever you're missing the most, and I really like that, and so you lose. So my question is, how much you think that applies in public forum? In debate, in many other formats, it doesn't necessarily always apply. You can be like a Project K team that runs the same argument every single round. In public forum, how much do you think it is about becoming really good at your niche versus sort of like judge-proofing your strategy?
Yeah, I think it's all in judge-proofing yourself, essentially. I think the key to being really successful in this activity, at least right now, is to become really, really well-rounded. I think it's really hard to do. Obviously, it's easier to just get really good at one thing and just like use that as your bread and butter all the time. But I mean, that's just it. You're totally right. It's just not possible to do in this format. When even at like the most competitive tournaments, Glenbrook's, TOC, there's a ton of lay judges and stuff. So I think that's totally right. And you know, the other thing I'd say is that if you really attach yourself to one particular thing, that comes at a huge cost, which is that it comes at the cost of forcing yourself to improve in the other areas where you are uncomfortable. And I think the thing that holds a lot of debaters back is that people don't naturally want to venture into the areas and types of debate in which they feel uncomfortable, right? People don't want to tell their coach to judge this practice round like it's a lay round just to get better at lay debate, right? Everyone wants to just like go as fast as they can and just have like a tech substance debate or, you know, something like that. But that's not, you know, you just can't consistently win and perform good at tournaments when you tailor all of your practice to only be attractive to less than half of judges. You know what I mean? So yeah,
the weirdest phenomenon. The weirdest phenomenon amongst high school debaters.
A lot, how everyone complains about lay judges when it's at the most technical tournaments, 70% of the field. Like,
yep, absolutely.
I went to TOC 1 year as like a hired like assistant coach, researcher, all that kind of stuff. Actually, I think it's 2019, so the first year y'all crushed it. But I remember being in these rounds, right? And I had, at this time, basically zero public forum, like, actual background, right? I had competed in college parley, college policy, and college Lincoln Douglas debate. And I was like, okay, well, you know, my view of PF at the time was, like, pretty dismal, to be completely honest, just because I'm like, every debate I've seen is just paraphrasing, and, like, you know, they don't even give each other evidence, and it drives you crazy, no disclosure. But I went to this tournament, and I'm thinking, like, okay, but this is the TOC. Like, people are going to be nuts, you know, blah, 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 whatever, right? And, like, one of the strategies I prepped for this team, because it was on, like, the India Security Council topic, as, like, a backup strat, is I'm like, look, if we have a technical judge, like, they say, like, oh, I'm into all this stuff, I'm progressive, blah, we're going to read neoliberalism. We're going to say that the United Nations is a neoliberal institution that blah, blah, right, you know, because that was my shit in college. And I remember we read it in front of this judge whose paradigm was just straight up, like, oh, yeah, you know, I'm a flow judge, like, it's not about persuasion, tech, like, the first thing it said in their philosophy was tech over truth, always not debatable, like, blah, 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 and I would listen to the decision in this debate round, and I was like, my perception of what tech over truth means, and even, you know, this judge, like, who was a PF person originally, like, there's a mile between those perceptions, because I'm like, they don't even have this on their flow, do they? Like, I can tell that they don't understand what's happening on this level and whatnot, and so, like, what would you, I guess, my concern as a competitor a lot of the time, because I originally come from a CC background, so we did the whole persuasive, like, you know, that's, you know, thanks so much for being here, I stand in the firmest affirmation, like, blah, blah, that kind of stuff, right?
I like to start with a warm blanket.
Yeah, every speech starts with thank yous. A brief off-time roadmap for the 1AC. It's going to be the case, in order. That kind of, but so, I came from that background, and when I went to 4-year, like Sasan was saying, and got technical and crazy, I felt incredibly comfortable against the best teams in the country when I had a lay judge. I was like, that's a lock. This one's in the bag already, because they're not going to adapt and I will. But my biggest fear was always having a judge who, like, usually first year outs, like they just finished, competing that last year, and who only like technical debate, because I knew that meant that like there's nothing I can actually do in terms of preparing my strategy for this round that will make a difference. There's no research work I can do or any of that. It's just going to be someone's going to read a bunch of theory and one of us will win it, I guess. And so in front of technical judges specifically, did you like have Tech 1 ACs, or I guess they call them like just constructives in public forum? Like, did you have like a tech constructive versus a lay constructive versus a flay constructive, or did you prep one case and then you would just adapt it on the fly as needed? How did you change when you had super technical judges?
Yeah, we would have different cases. We would always have lay cases and tech cases. And sometimes we would even have like a third version, because you're like that is such a useful thing that you just said about how in PF there are these landmine judges basically, where everything in their paradigm indicates that like they know what's up, and then just like you said, they hear a critique and like their like minds melt, right? Like there are totally those judges. And one little rule of thumb that I always think is useful is that when someone says tech over truth and has a PF background, most of the time, not all the time, most of the time, they don't really mean tech over truth. They mean in the substance debate, tech over truth, right? But things outside of that, no, there's really nothing that you can rely on. Nothing is promised in that area. Usually what helped me select if, can I read theory? Can I read a critique? If a judge says they're tab, which obviously tabula rasa, that is usually indicative of, okay, they actually know this term that usually people that do tech debate only know, like actual tech debate. And that would kind of, if I saw that term, I would usually say, okay, we're probably good to go with this guy. So that's kind of how I would navigate that. In terms of my like casing situation more specifically, we would have, for like a flow PF judge, we would usually have like a 3 contention case or something, something that was more dense. But with lay judges, we would definitely do either a sole contention or like a 2 contention case. And I think there are a couple of reasons why. One of the main ones is that it's all about the narrative to them, right? And it seems really weird to like someone who's just like a normal person when you make 3 arguments and then you just like concede to 2 of them being like wrong, right? So like that feels really weird to like a lot of lay people of that background. So yeah, our cases did get a lot different because we would try to combat that by having, less arguments being made.
I'm curious about the team structure on Blake a little bit. Not so much about like the structure of how things are organized, but there are some schools that lean really heavily on like alumni and their involvement with the team. There's teams that are all about peer coaching, and they have a culture of people working with each other all the time, like running rounds together or whatever, because there's just not enough coaches. And there's other teams that are just like, look, we're getting the best coaches. We're making sure we have a lot of time to spend individually. Where do you see, like, how would you describe Blake on that spectrum? And what do you think the advantages of that were?
I want to add one thing to that real quick, because Sasan won't be aware of this, but I remember at that TOC, obviously I was checking the debate subreddit, and I remember seeing like posts and like tons of comments and feedback, and it was like people shitting on y'all a little bit and being well, they have like all these coaches and they do all, and I can't remember if it was you or your partner who came in there and was like, my coaches didn't cut a single thing for me. Every argument I ever wrote, blah, blah, blah. Like, yes, we have great coaches. We have great coaches, and I don't apologize for it, but like we are doing the work and blah, 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 blah. And so with that factored into what Sasan said, I just wanted to.
So what's that dynamic like?
So it's kind of interesting because the dynamic changes a lot, or at least this was my experience. It changes a lot based on like your experience level, So, coaches will give you a different amount of attention. You'll be talking to different coaches based on your experience level. And, it's so funny. Blake has this reputation as like Blake Army and all that stuff. But we also have like a ridiculously huge amount of people in the program, like to the point where when I was like a novice, it didn't feel like I was getting that much attention from coaches at all. And that's not to say this was whatsoever their fault. I mean, they were great. It just didn't. It was not like, oh, you have your own personalized coach that just like runs around with you all the time. That was never how it was. In terms of what the dynamic was like more recently, at least for me, the vast majority of stuff was peer to peer. Our coaches did not cut cards. I mean, sometimes once in a while, like Christian would like throw together a file. But for the most part, they were not cutting our cards. And all of the work was on us as students. And I think that was a great thing because it forces the entire team to have a work ethic or else nothing will get done. And the coaches are really just there to sort of like watch you speak and help you improve your actual skills. They don't do any research for you. And so, yeah, just like about the TOC thing, it was so crazy. People were like, there was this conspiracy going around. Then my coaches were like writing my rebuttals and stuff, just absolutely ridiculous nonsense that like just was pulled out of thin air. So yeah, that was never how it was. It was always we would rely on ourselves and our peers for the actual work, but the coaches were there to chaperone us, help us improve, give us strategic advice, talk to us about new skills and concepts like progressive arguments, but they would never do our work. And I'm glad it was that way.
I'm really interested in practice structures because at the University of the Pacific, like once again where I went for a while, it was super rigid. And it was every Tuesday, we are going to be there from 3:30 to 9 o'clock, and it is a study hall or file hall. So we were assigned files every week. If your files weren't done, you had to do files till 9 p.m. Once you finished your files, you were allowed to do homework, but you had to be there. Like the coaches wanted to see you to make sure you were keeping up with academics and all that stuff. On Wednesdays, it was IE practice or Lincoln Douglas practice, and it was the exact same thing. It's going to be 3:30 to 9 o'clock. Obviously, this is college, so it's a little bit different, and everyone's on scholarship.
Yeah.
3:30 to 9 o'clock, and originally, my first year there, it was you will have a dance card when you get there, and they were going to tell you that at this time you are going to be meeting with this coach in this room for blah, 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 right? And then Thursdays was debate day, and you were going to have 3 practice rounds. You're going to have a dinner break after the second round, and you're going to be in front of these coaches, blah, 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 against these teammates of yours. Very rigid. And then on top of that, go to an office hour once a week or whatever. But it's very, like, group practice driven. It wasn't particularly an office hour model until I became a graduate assistant and then like sort of shift to that. At DVC, it's basically which is our community college, it's entirely an office hour model, right? Like we have meetings, but it's a class because it's part of the curriculum. And so we talk to 20 kids and we don't do any coaching there. And then we say, sign up for coaching sessions. We'll meet you. I make special time for like the varsity students to do debates, whatever. But what I want to know is sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So to put that into perspective, Paul joined our coaching staff at the community college this year. Before that, for the past 5 years, I was running it by myself, and it's not as big as Blake, but it's still like, for every 2, 4, 6 kids we take to state or nationals, we have like 30 kids doing debate at the school, and it's like they're not on scholarship. I can't say show up Thursday night, so every day was just kind of like, okay, show up. And I'll get in the room and I'll say, okay, what questions do you have? And we kind of just go through that and be like, do we have time for a practice debate? So with that being like the spectrum of kind of just show up and figure it out versus like show up and be told what you're practicing today, how would you place what the sort of practice culture is?
Right. Yeah. I think that it was a variety of those. Like there would be some days where it would be like, okay, we're going to do practice rounds today. That was the most frequent thing. We would just like debate another Blake team, and a coach or like a captain when we were younger would watch. And we would do feedback and then maybe redos or something like that. But yeah, then there were other days when we would be doing research. And to be honest, I think that it was just like 100% varied. Like we really don't, I don't think that we trended particularly heavily in one of those two directions. But it was nice because there was this sort of like thing where the students could, to a degree, suggest focuses for prep, So like if people wanted to go over like what are the best ideas for casing on this topic for like a new topic, that would be something that we would do if like people suggested it. So the coaches were pretty receptive to like we would like want to do if like a lot of like if multiple partnerships do a particular. So yeah, honestly, I can't really speak to really focusing on like office hours and like having like a longer period is like better or worse. But I definitely didn't have any complaints about the way we did it. I felt like having a variety lets you work on your skill development and also your kind of like topic prep, because whenever they just give you longer periods of time to just research, you're going to get done. At least that was my experience. Usually when I do like drills off by myself, I would usually just do that if like there were, coaches like, at practice. I would usually just do drills on my own time at home or something. But in terms of the time, practices were, I think they were twice a week for 2 hours. But there were also days where you could come in after school besides that. So if you really wanted to, you could actually come in more frequently, and like the coaches would usually be there. And as I got more and more, I did that a lot. I would be in there most days.
Is it good? My dogs are barking.
Oh yeah. Well, I have a couple more questions about like
cool
debate strategy stuff. But one thing I've always been curious about, because I didn't do debate in high school, Paul didn't do debate in high school. So I know I think numerically, the vast majority of people who do debate, like it's a high school event, usually public forum, right? But to me, there's always this weird aspect to it, right? Like there's these weird crossover sports where they're like, it's tennis, but you play with your feet. Or like it's frisbee or golf, but it's with a frisbee instead of golf, right? To me, public forum is like it's debate, but you're in high school. Like you are a growing teenager surrounded by other teenagers, and you're trying to figure out like who you are and all of your like personal anxieties and dealing with high school bullshit. And I guess to what degree like does that how does that affect the experience? Like how do you think like being in high school affects the experience of doing public forum, and how did you navigate that?
Yeah, good question. I honestly think that debate was funny in that area for me because in some ways it was kind of like an escape when I was like at the tournament from like all the like stress and just like the stupid things you worry about, whether it's like social stuff or like a test coming up. I at least for me, when I was at a tournament, I would just be totally immersed, like 100%. So that was kind of how I related with that. In terms of another way that my experience in high school really like affected how debate developed skills in me, one thing that was really useful that debate did is that it really forced me to get good at time management, and like more as like a life skill than anything, because before online debate, obviously you would have to travel if you wanted to go to a tournament, and you would miss like 2 days of school or like at least a day of school. And that's like tough. That's tough, especially if you want to travel frequently, and we would be traveling a couple times a month. And like, I went to Singapore with Team USA and Germany with Team USA. And like, of course I'm missing a week and a half at a time for that. Cause like, you're not just going to go to Singapore and come back the next day. So that forced me to be good at, budgeting time ahead of time to deal with like missing a bunch of school. But yeah, I mean, I think that asking high schoolers to do PF at like a high level is tough because a lot of the things being debated are like so much more complicated than you understand as especially a high schooler that is newer to debate. Like the amount of layers that just don't get probed in any international relations debate that you will see, obviously it's huge. So it's definitely tough, but I think it can also be really rewarding in different ways.
I was going to ask, obviously you do evidentiary debate, right? Our main thing that we've done through college is parliamentary debate, but I have a lot of experience with like Lincoln Douglas and a bit with policy. And for me, I actually, I was way more successful in parley than I was in LD. Didn't really do anything of note in LD, but I always loved it. Like in some respects, even more than parley, because I knew I would do the work. I knew that, like, if there was a case that someone had disclosed, like, I was gonna find the answers to it. And, like, I honestly, this is the worst part of me as a coach to this day, is that, like, I love cutting LD stuff. And so, like, if I think that, okay, you know what, I have a kid who's really working hard, they're putting in the time, like, they're cutting case snake, when they're sleeping, I'm cutting 8 more cases for them. Like, I'm gonna get this stuff done. Like, I'm totally willing to put in as much work as possible. But because of that, I really didn't feel that, like, it was necessarily my skill in rounds. Like, I understood debates. Like, you can't, do well at nationals or throughout the season if you don't understand things about debate. And, I understand the K, I understand theory, whatever. But, like, I was never the most technical debater. No one would ever say that about me, right? But one area where I felt I could make up for that was my research. I'm like, I'm just going to work as hard as possible and just be super prepped, whether it's Parley, LD, policy, or whatever. And I'm wondering for you, do you think that, a lot of your success, and you had an incredible amount of it, is more attributable to your development of in-round skills, of round vision, of just technical analysis of the flow, or were you like a prep monster and just like you had the cards, you had the evidence, and you felt confident in that and like kind of paid in advance, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing, and this pertains to both your skill development and the prep you do. I always like to think that the result of 90% plus of rounds is determined before it begins, and that has to do with what was your case? Did you think about what their case was? Did you think about how your arguments were interacting beforehand? So one thing we would do is that we would always be thinking strategically in terms of what the arguments we were going to run would be. And it's interesting in terms of whether I was like a prep monster, or I just like relied on my skills. I actually made a major transition in my approach. When I was sophomore year, junior year, I was grinding like insane amounts. Like I honestly kind of in some ways, I sometimes wish I would have dialed it back a little bit. I was like really, really into being the most prepped person. Like my block file for the April topic in 2019 is like absolutely unbelievable. Like the amount of work that I put into that thing is like honestly kind of embarrassing. So that was how I started off. And this was actually true senior year as well. When we were at tournaments, it would be, pretty much 16 hours of debate. I mean, we would be grinding and totally focused on prepping teams out, fixing our block files, getting another possible case to run. We would not be, the team that was off like playing Frisbee on the lawn, like we were totally locked in at tournaments. But in terms of how I relied on my, like skills, I did always rely on just knowing more and being more prepped sophomore and junior year. And that was also true in the September topic of senior year. But then what happened is that I went to Germany for Team USA to compete at the European tournament. And I mean, this is also November of my senior year, so I'm like grinding college admissions, and I did no prep on the November topic. And this European thing happens, and I finish the tournament, and I'm flying back, and Glenbrooks is in 2 days. And European had ended, and I hadn't cut a single card on the topic as of a day before Glenbrooks. And then we won Glenbrooks. And so from there, I kind of realized that I have grinded enough to the point where I don't really need to like do as much work as I used to. And to be honest, that kind of created a vicious cycle. I low-key slacked senior year. Like low-key, I did not.
Senioritis, dude. 100%.
Yeah. So yeah, I was not the same person debate-wise outside of around senior year. Not at all. I definitely started relying more on just like in-round stuff.
And I think a lot of that pertains to just like limited prep events, right? And once you sort of just like get used to having a limited time and trying to find like the similarities between topics and what you already know that you can use in this case.
Right.
And I think that's
one thing for me is that I also kind of had like a bit of an unfair advantage because when I wouldn't be doing that much work, we always had, like 2 or 3 other competent teams that would debate. So I would just like ask them for their block file. And then like, before the tournament, I would just like go through it and like make it sort of like personalized, add some better stuff. And I definitely kind of relied on that. I did rely on the help of my teammates who are still out there grinding, doing really well. They were really amazing and were so key to my success, particularly junior and senior year. Definitely the policy that Blake has is super, super open on prep sharing. I know that I've been coaching this year and I've been working with a lot of students, and it's really become apparent how much of a logistical problem withholding prep from other members of your team becomes in a lot of programs. And it just really seems to suck. Blake, thankfully, does not have any of those issues. So that was super great for me.
Well, I mean, and I think that's in a lot of ways, a uniquely public forum issue as far as evidentiary debate goes, because, like, in LD and policy, you're going to disclose anyway. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to disclose the 1AC and the 1NC and all that stuff and, like, all the cards. Right. And so, like, there's no reason to hide a lot of your stuff from other teams. Like, obviously, block files are a little bit different, but in college Lincoln Douglas debate, the best team in the country is Western Kentucky University. They have been forever, and they probably will be. Every year, they have like 3 of the top 5 best debaters in the nation, more or less. Mm-hmm. And if you and they disclose everything. And if you look through their like 1ACs, 1NCs, and whatnot, like they're all reading like more, you know, they're changed stuff, but like they all have this same disad, they all have this same solvency, they all have this same tier, whatever. Like it's clear that they're working together. And when you talk about pure coaching or pure working together, whether that's through captains or whatever, like almost every successful team, that is what they are doing at the end of the day. It's that they are competing with each other in practice, but when they go to the tournament, it's like a team affair. And in my experience, I mean, our junior year for me in Dallas, like our team was very competitive. Like we wanted to be like the A team or the travel team or whatever, right? But so did everyone else. But rather than it being like vindictive and being like, oh, that means we have to sabotage them or whatever, it was like, well, let's just make each other better. Because if we all keep holding each other accountable and keep pushing for work, like we're all going to do better. And in the long term, that's kind of what matters. And so I wanted to ask, like, and this is a question we were talking about ahead of time, did you have a rival, whether in your team or on another team? And, like, what's the story of that for you? And, like, what did that drive you? Did that help you? Or what do you think about that?
That's a great question. Yeah. So I think that my first ever rival, it was a very one-sided relationship because I was like a freshman / sophomore and they were like juniors and seniors, and they were like amazing. This team was from Edina. They were Edina MZ. There's a new Edina MZ that includes one of the kids' brothers, and they're also fantastic, and they're currently debating. But the old Edina MZ was my like personal self-selected rival because of course they were at every Minnesota tournament because we competed in the same areas. That was really, I think their presence, they have no idea of like any of this being true. So it's kind of weird. It would be weird if they saw this, but their presence really did push me to do better because I wound up debating them like 3 or 4 times. And the first 2 times I lost, and I lost like pretty handily. And from there, I really looked into those rounds because this was like the team on the Minnesota circuit. They were like the team that everyone wanted to beat. Everyone thought was so good. They won state. They were like ranked top 5 in the country. They were fantastic. And so I like really was like interested in, picking up their skills. Like, what are they doing that I'm not doing? And I actually debated them a couple of times sophomore year. And I think that I beat them both times. And I think that a lot of that just came from, I would always watch their elim rounds. I would watch how they debated. I would, early in the tournament, try to figure out what case they were running because I figured that if I did well, I would run into that case. So I just would think things through like a lot in advance. And I think that's the other benefit of having the approach to tournaments where you're in the game 16 hours a day. Because you really like adopt little like you think of dumb things that work really well. Like for example, we came up with a bunch of straight turns to one of their cases that they were running at national qualifiers, and we knocked them out of nat quals because we like wrote all of these turns. And then we didn't qual. But
this is
I
getting
think
too eerily similar to my life right now, and it's starting to disturb me a little bit. But keep going, and then I'll talk about it. It's getting too close at this point.
That's so funny. But yeah. I mean, they were always so nice. To be honest, one of the rounds we beat them in, we should not have won, but still did it. So yeah, I think that's my biggest experience with the rival. The last thing I would say is that my junior year, I think my rival became who is now my partner senior year and his partner, because Thomas and I would debate them, and they were also fantastic. And we would have really close rounds, and sometimes they would get like low key a little bit heated because we were like really like close and like, you know, in skill level. And obviously outside of round, it was like all love. We never had like any problems that were real or anything, but we were intensely competitive, and we did 20 practice rounds that year. So having a team that was really great and that we could just do a practice round with at will was so helpful in our improvement, because that's something that's, you know, 95% of teams don't have, you know, like a fantastic team to push them whenever they want. So that was a major blessing my junior year.
I just love this idea of having a rival.
Blake, and I have a coworker named Blake, so now I call Paul Blake. Paul, share your Berkeley trauma. And then
yeah, please. I love this idea of like having a rival that doesn't even know or like think about it, because that is exactly what my relationship with Berkeley KL was my junior and senior year. We hit this team 7 times junior year, 7 times, and they beat us all 7 times. And it was incredibly frustrating, man. Like, I just was losing my mind, and like
running the same argument all 7
times. Running like the same argument basically every 7, like, you know, like twice they didn't, but like, I mean, just stomping my guts out. And there's this kid on there in that partnership, Tom Cady, who is just like, I mean, incredible. The dude's like unbelievable at debate. But at nationals, our junior year, we got eliminated by them. They eliminated us from the tournament. They went to finals, and then they lost. We lost in semis to them. And I remember that, like, in this round, I finally felt like, oh my God, like, I think I can beat them. Like, we lost that round, but I was like, I think I can do it now. Like, something clicked or whatever. And that last day of my junior year, I made a Word doc, and it was called A2 Berkeley's Bullshit. And I hit up everyone I respect in the community and whatnot. I'm like, hey, I want your thoughts on this argument that Berkeley reached or this argument Berkeley reached. And I saved it. In senior year, I hit them 2 times, right? But it was during the regular season. And I didn't break it out. I didn't break out the doc. I'm like, nope, I am saving this. I am saving this for nationals. That's all I care about.
Is so crazy.
And so senior year comes along, and the national championship's happening, and it's going to be day 3 of the NPTE, and day 3 is the last day of nationals, and it's like, it's my favorite moment in all of debate, like every year, NPTE day 3, because you start this tournament, everyone's there, and it's all love and it's all fun, but day 3, careers are ending. Careers for great teams are ending, right? And it's quiet, because no one wants to, like, you know, push anyone off or whatever, and there's just fewer people because they've given up or they're at, you know, the beach or whatever. And the night of day 2, I know the following day, because I've looked at the bracket, we're hitting Berkeley KL in the morning, and I'm like, okay, feeling good, working with my buddy Dominic, and I'm like, Dom, like, time me on this, like, do you think about this, whatever. Sasan calls me the following morning and gives me like a really fire pep talk that like I hold dear to this day. Like, I'm almost tearing up just thinking about it, right? Because he knew how big of a deal it was to me. And we go into this round, right? And we're prepping like crazy. Because in Parley, like, even if you have the files written, you have to write them down by hand in 20 minutes if you're going to use them. And so we're prepping, and we go into this round, and they're negative. And I'm like, I need them to read Buddhism. Because if they read Buddhism, we're good. And if they don't, we're probably, you know, screwed. My partner reads the 1AC, the first constructive, and I'm like, just my heart is just pounding out of my chest, and my coaches are like in the audience, and blah 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 blah, and they stand up and they go, it's gonna be 2 off, and I'm like, okay, please. And they start reading Buddhism, and like a wave of relief just washes over me, because the second they started reading it, I'm like, we're gonna finally beat Berkeley KL, and we ended up beating them in this round, right? And like, I mean, it was just deep, dude. Like every study they had ever read throughout the year, I looked up and was like, you are lying about it. This to me is like the most important round, and I just unbelievable. And then immediately end up losing in semifinals, so it didn't matter because their B team won the national championship over us instead. Lost to the other two, but like, just I don't think Tom Cady has ever a day in his life thought about me outside of a tournament. I don't think he's ever like, I have to beat Paul. But I spent a year like, I have to beat Tom. I'd see him in the bathroom and he'd be so nice and be like, hey Paul, and I'd be like, hey Tom. And
I had
so
the exact same experience. Like I was like a sophomore, they had no idea like I was not, like well known whatsoever. I hadn't done much. But the craziest thing you said that made me think of what I had done, I had the exact same type of document. I had a document called Edina with some like profanity in the title. Literally filled that thing with so much crap on their cases. It was ridiculous. And the craziest thing about that districts tournament is that at districts, which was the final time I debated them, they were seniors. They had just won Minnesota State the weekend before, and it was myself and then Thomas and then his partner at the time. Because Thomas and his partner had just lost to them in state finals. So we had gotten together and we were like, we are not going to lose districts. And so we made this file. It was just humongous. We did the same thing you did. It's so
prep
funny.
outs. I'll let you go in a second, but this is what I don't get about public forum, because what they don't seem to understand about why disclosure is good is because there is nothing more satisfying in debate than a sick prep out. When when it's like all my homies hate Edina, you know what I mean? Like we're putting this folder together and like we're just gonna keep working, and like you spend all your time, you talk to your coaches, you're in the van on the way to the tournament or whatever, you're listening to the Wu-Tang Clan, like you're trying to get into it because you know you're gonna read this file. You're just warming up, doing your, you don't spread in PF, but like you're doing your speaking drills. Yeah, that's more specific. But yeah, but just like prep outs are so satisfying. It feels so, and then the other team, if it's not the end of the year, they're coming back with heat. And it's a little different in PF because the topic changes month to month. But if you're going to 2 tournaments in the same month, like, it just drives these sick rivalries and creates these sick moments instead of having debates where kids just read some squirrely shit that's not actually like core to the literature, and then you're like, well, great.
The other thing is that like I learned, because like I was team prep out the entire time I debated. Like there's this big anti prep out movement in PF. Makes no sense to me. The thing about prep outs is that I learned more from just prep outs than like most classes in school, because you dig so deep into like studies. Like when you read a full study, you really get a grasp for like how insanely overgeneralized studies are in debate. They're just applied to so many situations that the authors would never imagine they would be applied to. And I really like learned how statistics work from just doing prep outs and like reading original studies teams cited and figuring out this sucks. Like this has nothing to do with what you're saying.
It's this notion. So, I'm it's this notion of internal warrants, right? And I think you actually kind of, this is another callback to that TOC final round, right? Where like they were challenging you on that like will sell nuclear weapons to Saudi Arabia thing, and like you're like, that's not even the argument. And they're like, well, you said it, and it's like, no, like, can I please read you this piece of evidence, like, with a clear, concise explanation from an expert in the field on this thing? But they're like, yeah, but our tag is better. And so much of public forum, I mean, in evidentiary debate in general, but in public forum, because of the paraphrasing, it's like all tag, no substance. And then when a debater comes along and instead is like, please, for the love of God, call these cards, judge. Like, they're basically just rolling the dice and hoping that the judge is like, you know what, I will call that card for once and actually look at it. And that tournament, me and Sasan, like I told you, embarrassingly, we entered a tournament this summer because we thought it'd be funny, a public forum tournament. And the people running it were cool. Shout out to the PF Discord and Serena Mao and all them. But Sasan had this one... Dude, we didn't even break. That's the funniest thing. We went 3-3, and so one of the we'll talk about that in a minute. I didn't want to get into it. We have the videos and stuff. We have the videos. It's like some of these, dude, just the reactions of me alone, like hearing these decisions.
Paul would lose, and then it'd be like, okay, I need you to listen to why we lost. I'm gonna go yell in that room over.
Yeah, I just couldn't even. I mean, dude, like, because I mean, like, I won 90% of every round I was in college, like, literally statistically, and then I went to one random public forum tournament, and all of a sudden I'm 50%.
It's a harder event, dude.
It's just a harder event. But anyway, what I was going to say is, there was this one card we were reading, Flanagan 18, that had, like, just the entire thing was about UBI for women specifically, and battered women specifically, it literally says this in the card, is the best possible policy imaginable for financial restitution or whatever, right? And like it has all these reasons, and we would read it, and the other team would be like, so why is it the best possible? And we'd be like, yeah, well, there's like 7 reasons. They're like, well, that's not in your tag. And we're like, I don't know what to tell you. It is in the card. It is a quote. We have the card. Oh man, dude. But now that I've been ranting, Sasan, I interrupted you like 6 times.
Speaking of
read Flanagan 18. Go ahead.
Flanagan 18, good card. Speaking of your neuroses and prep outs and all of that, like you and Paul were not play frisbee on the lawn debaters. And one of the interesting things about being a, not like mercenary coach for hire, let me work with the best of the best, but like community college, you sign up for a class if you're just interested in doing it, cool, or even just running a tournament, right? The percentage of debaters that are dedicated at the level of being intensely competitive or like really, really care about the outcome and aren't, you know, I'm going to say frisbee on the lawn a lot because I really like that framing.
It's fantastic. Thank you for
that.
That's going to be the title of the video, Frisbee on the Lawn, featuring Jack Johnson.
Well, it's what, like 20%, right? And we have a national championship at the community college level that's a travel tournament, and they have like special activities every night. Come to board game night. Come to dance, to this and that, which our students are not allowed to go to. Because I swear to God, if you're at board game night and you wake up and you're too tired to do well in your event, you're gonna walk.
A national championship?
But that's the thing, right? 80% of people there aren't going to be in those final rounds, right? Yeah. So if you have an event, either like public forum as a whole or a tournament, where the only people that get anything out of it are these 20%, then you have 80% of people have a terrible time. The activity really can't sustain itself, right? Whether it's a single event or if it's like public forum, right? Which is its own topic. But my question is, you know that you're not a frisbee on the lawn type debater. Do you think that's, like you describe yourself as intensely competitive, which Paul and I relate to. Do you think that's something that you are? Or do you think that's a decision you make at some point in your career? And if so, like, what was that decision like for you? Like, did you decide to buy into it and be like, you know what? I'm going to be hyper-focused on this? Do you think it's just a part of your makeup as a person?
You know, I wouldn't say that it's part of your makeup as a person, but I do think it comes from your approach to prepping at tournaments, and it comes from the team environment you were, like, you know, you came up in, right? I think that if I was surrounded by people who were goofing off at tournaments, there's a very good chance that I would have just taken to that, you know, because I am of the school of thought that we're mostly products of our environment, and I think in debate that's no exception. But that was not the way that Blake has ever done things. They're very no nonsense, you know, very all about focus. And to be honest, I don't think that at any point I decided that I was just going to just put my nose to the grindstone. I didn't really consider any other option, to be honest. I think that my, like, how competitive I was and how badly I did want to win, plus the fact that acting that out by not doing anything except prep was a norm, caused me to do that. I don't think there was much of a decision involved, at least for me.
I can't remember if I've talked about this before in a Proteus video, but I remember after going to my first debate tournament ever, my wife, at the time she was just my girlfriend, but I was hanging out with my wife and I told her, I'm like, hey, you can't let me quit this. I'm like, you can't let me quit this. Like, I really, really think I can be good at this, and I think, like, I can, like, this was insane to say it in like, my first week or two of competition. I'm like, at the time I was like, I want to win the state championship. I wasn't thinking about nationals at all, but I'm like, but I really want to do this, and I really think I can do this, and I have to be all in if I'm going to do that, and you just can't let me quit. Because when I was in high school, I'd been a wrestler and I was successful, and then I got injured, and so I quit. I was like, well, just whatever. I guess I'm just done with wrestling. And I always wondered, like, could I have been better at that? And with debate, it was like literally week 1, I knew like I have to go giga all in on this or whatever. And so it's interesting but the thing is, I knew that from age 5. I literally in kindergarten, the second week of class, the teacher had us all sitting down in a circle. And she said, all right, gang, Miss Hammer, rest in peace. She said, raise your hand if you can read. And Sarah Paff and Clay, I can't remember his last name, raised their hand. And I remember looking around. And, like, I didn't say this because I was 5, but the functional expression in my head was, this will never happen to me again. I was like, this will never happen to me again. I felt so embarrassed that, like, other kids know how to read and I don't know how to read. I just assumed we all didn't know how to read. And, like, I carried that with me for my whole life, with everything, with school and with competition and whatnot. I'm like, there's someone else who's doing better, And, and it was, it competitively worked out in some respects, but it's a curse in a lot of other areas because, like, unlike you, I didn't win the national championship, right? I tried really hard, came really close twice, but didn't win it. And so even now as like a 28-year-old professor who has a great life and coaches kids who are wonderful and sees them successful, I still every once in a while like wake up and go, didn't win a goddamn national championship, like haunts me with it. The reason I'm giving all this preamble is, obviously you did. You did it twice. It's really impressive. Do you think if you hadn't won TOC, or, which I consider to be the national championship, obviously NSDA is too, but clearly TOC is an incredibly difficult to win national level competition. Do you think you would have been satisfied? Like, do you think you would have, looking back on your career, been like, yeah, it was a lot of fun, or did you have to have that win?
I think, yeah, I to be honest, don't think I would have been satisfied. I was, and this is not like an endorsement of this way of thinking at all. Like, it's not healthy, because the reality is that you need to get lucky to win a national championship, because there are like 20 other teams there that are fantastic debaters as well. And so, like, you can't have a 1 in 100 mistake where you just like drop something at any point in any speech you give for the entire tournament, because if you do that, you're not going to win the national championship, So everything has to go right. And everything went right for me 2 times, but I don't think that I would have been satisfied. And that's particularly because winning the TOC and then winning it twice after I did it was like the goal that I had. And actually, before nationals went online, I really wanted to win the Triple Crown. I wanted to win NSDA, TOC, and NDCA. And I had won NDCA and TOC, but I really wanted to get Nats. And then it went online, and I didn't really enjoy online debate that much. Probably just because I wasn't used to it, to be honest. Like, now I feel like it's kind of like grown on me a bit. But I really wasn't used to it at all. I didn't like it. I felt like it wasn't the same. I'm someone who really like kind of likes the like sort of like the adrenaline rush of having to be your absolute best talking in front of like a bunch of people. That was like a lot of the experience for me, just putting myself in this position where it's like you cannot mess up. For some reason I found that really fun. And online debate didn't have the same thing, which is why I decided not to do Nats. But yeah, I was definitely a like I have to achieve this goal type of person.
How long after you won the first TOC, like, so junior year, you win TOC, how many days, hours, whatever is it before you're like, I gotta win next year too? Like, when did the glimmer? Because a lot of people, I mean, like Sasan said, like, the reality is the vast majority of people, if you look at all debaters who've ever done the activity, the vast majority have never even broke at a tournament. Yeah. That's just how it works, because less than 50% or 50% break at every tournament. Yeah. Certainly, maybe 20% at best have won a tournament, and 5% have won a tournament of note, like Glenn Brooks, TOC, NSDA, whatever you consider those tournaments, right? And having won a few of, like, not those tournaments, but like a few notable tournaments before in my career, like, I remember we won Mile High, which back then was, like, other than nationals, the hardest tournament. And like I was just buzzing for like a whole day. And then the sense of dread that like this means nothing if we don't win nationals like crept in pretty quickly. And I just wonder for you, you know, like you literally reach the top of the mountain and then you're like, I have another year. So like when did that come across for you?
To be honest, it was pretty immediate, but there was a reason. And the reason is that the reaction to us winning junior year it felt like from most people, it in retrospect was not at all from most people. It was from like a 5% of the debate Reddit, but it felt like for a time we were like, it felt like everyone thought it was a fluke, you know, which was crazy to me because in April we had won the King Round Robin, NDCA, and then we won TOC. So I was like, are we not like, do we not have our respect? But what happened is that there was this final round that was really like insanely close, and it was us against Lincoln Sudbury, Sundeep, and his partner Danny. And they had been around for 3 years. They'd been winning circuit tournaments for 3 years. They had they were totally, you know, entrenched. And really, my partner and I, junior year, like we hadn't like won any national tournaments before April. And so I think a lot of the response to the final decision is that we didn't deserve to win. And it was like basically a judge screw. And not only do I vehemently disagree with that, but my response to that was I think it did kind of get to me at first, at least, that like I win the TOC and then like it's still not looked at as like this legitimate thing. And so I did just kind of immediately start to be like, what, do I have to win this again? So that was kind of how I got to thinking about it, you know?
This is the weirdest kindred spirit thing I've ever had happen in my life, Sasan. This is all very strange for me. It's just
you're already married.
Yeah, I'm married, but the parallels are very, I mean, it's just so strange, dude. Like it just
yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have I think there are like things that happen in debate. Like I know a lot of different people when they won a major tournament, there was a huge backlash against them. It's really common, especially in like for national championships in like high school debate formats. Like it's just like if you win a national championship and maybe it was a really close round, or like there is some argument for why you should have lost that round, or you know maybe you weren't as successful the rest of the year, like the backlash can come just out of nowhere, which is kind of sad. But I mean, you can't really complain at that point, right? So it's a thing, yeah.
Our senior year, so in college, there's 2 national championships, kind of 3. I don't care about the third one. There's the NPDA, and then there's the NPTE. And the NPTE is invite only. You have to qualify. It's kind of like TOC, right? Basically, it's TOC, but there's points instead of bids, right? And so once you reach a certain point threshold, you qualify, and then they keep track the whole year who got the most points. And I remember our junior year, me and Dallas, like we finished second in the nation for like season-long points earning, and a lot of our tournaments had been like regional tournaments, right? Because that's our coach Stephen Frias, who to this day is all about this, is like, you got to build your region. Like, yeah, we're a national team ultimately, but like if our region sucks, then we're not going to get better, and that's who we're going to see most of the time, and blah, blah, blah. And also because, you know, we have a lot of community colleges. Like, we need to make the community college scene better so that they will transfer here or whatever, right? And as a result, I mean, we'd go to these regional tournaments, and we'd 16-0 them. Like, we'd win every single ballot possible, not drop a single thing. And our perception was like, look, if you think we're bad, then come beat us or whatever, right? And then junior year, we win Mile High, like I said, which was like, now we're like, holy shit, we did it, dude. Like, we're going to be legit. We're rank 1 in the nation right now. We just won Mile High. Like, we got to be a favorite. No one seemed to give a shit. We go to nationals, and everyone, like, openly are saying this, but also clearly behind our backs we're hearing it. People are like, oh, yeah, no, they're super inflated. Like, it's all, you know, flash. It's no substance. Like, they went to shitty regional tournaments. If they had been at the real tournaments, they would have got their ass kicked. Well, yeah, and we finished 6th at one of the nationals. We finished 3rd at the other one, right? And the next year, we come in, and there was this we didn't use Reddit really in the college community. There was this website called Net Benefits. That's for Parley college teams. And there was a proposal from someone who's on the MPTE board. They're like, we need to change the points. We need to change the point system. And they're like, the problem is, like, there's too much point inflation from shitty regional tournaments. And, like, we need to make it so that, like, there's prioritization of points for, like, these good tournaments because otherwise it's not reflective. And he's like, my kids, we all go to... And the thing is, he's like, we're not talking about anyone specific, but literally in his example of, like, a team that is overinflated and that went to these tournaments. So, like, he talked about me and my partner, and I remember we and the thing is, in college is a little different than high school because, like, you're a kid and, like, they're adults, but we were adults and they were an adult, and so we're like, okay, it's fucking on. And so we're like, look, dude, we whooped your kids' asses 3 times. I don't know if that doesn't count. We eliminated them from nationals this year. We'll do it this year too if you want, which we did. But bottom line is, like, because of that, like, we just had such a chip on our shoulder the entire time because we're like, no one thinks they're legit. Like, unless we do it again this year, like, no one's gonna care. And all of that, ignoring my own trauma and whatnot. What I wanted to ask is, I found it, and I always have found it, incredibly hard to accept validation from others, right? Like, I just don't believe it a lot of the time. I don't know what it is that's wrong with me. I'm like, no, they don't actually think that or whatever, or I have this chip on my shoulder where everyone thought I was bad even though we were objectively doing very, very good for 2 years. And I remember finally, I can think of 2 things where people said something to me who I, like, respected or whatever, and I was like, oh my god, I actually was good at debate. And, like, I know I didn't win nationals, but I felt good about it. And one of them was last year as a coach. I was talking to another coach who was also a competitor during my day. And he was like, I just wanted to let you know this, dude. I was driving my kids here. We were going to nationals. Like, I was driving my kids to this tournament. And we were in the car, and one of these kids is, like, a recruit, and he just came in from, like, NCFA, which is Northern California's region where we competed. And we were going through, like, the teams at the tournament and telling them, like, hey, here's the kind of arguments they read. And he got to you in Dallas, and he goes, Pacific PV? And his coach was like, yeah. And he goes, like, Paul Villa? And he's like, well, yes, he is the V in Pacific PV. There's also Dallas, who's much better than him, which is what his coach said. He's like, and the kid goes, do you know who Paul Villa is? And his coach is like, I debated Paul Villa. He's like, dude, like, Paul Villa is a NorCal legend. And, like, that is nothing. Like, in the grand scheme of things, it's not winning a tournament. It's not, like, winning nationals, not being ranked high. But just knowing that some kid from our community, like, actually from our community, from around us, from the Bay Area, like, had this perception of me. And this kid's not like he's great at debate or anything, but just thinking, and, like, that's his mind. It's like, when I think of good debater from where I'm from, and that, like, maybe I want to debate, like, someday, I think of Paul Villa. And I wanted to know for you, independent of something you want, right? Forget winning the tournaments and, all that other dope shit you did, which is sick. But was there ever anything you heard someone say or that they did say to you personally where you just felt like, holy shit, like, I am good, like, or maybe I'm great, or I'm excellent, or whatever, like, it's real, it's not just the imposter syndrome or whatever?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, I am definitely kind of the opinion that you can't be too interested in the opinions of other people if you're trying to succeed at something, because I think that there is a natural impulse, if you are doing well, among certain people to knock you down a peg so you're closer to whatever level they're on. You know what I mean? So it's totally, I think, like, useful to care if you can turn it into something that motivates you, right? Like you said, if you can take some, like, BS somebody tried to discredit you with and turn it into a chip on your shoulder, where this kind of gets you a little upset enough to try harder. You know what I mean? If you can do that, that's, like, awesome. That's better than if that person had never said anything in the first place. And I think that was my experience after junior year. But in terms of what, and I guess that's all to say that I honestly can't say that I have put a whole lot of stock into comments that people have made like that.
Totally.
I try, and the other reason it's dangerous, and we have beat a lot of teams on this, is that if you get too hyped up, it really does go to your head. Like, you start to think that, it's just like that team that you beat, 7 times. You start to think, like, I mean, I'm not going to lose. Everyone says I'm the best. Maybe I don't have to like look on the wiki and see what they're running and write a prep out. You know what I mean? Like it can be a little dangerous if you let that go to your head. But that didn't stop me from letting it happen when I was a sophomore because this guy that won the TOC, I think 2014 or 2015, I was at camp and I debated in front of him and he was judging me and he said, "This kid's going to win the TOC." And that was the moment where I was like, "Oh man, that's awesome. I love this. I love that he said that." And incidentally, he was right. I don't think that he really thought the comment through. I don't think it was like a genius prediction or anything, but getting the validation from someone who had accomplished what it had always been my goal to accomplish, that's definitely what sticks out for me when I try to remember that.
I'll give it to you 1 second. So I don't know, dude. Though, so Steve, my coach, when he was a graduate assistant, he was at SIU, and at the time, SIU was the best parley school in the country, right? And the first tournament ever, Josh Rivera, right? He's a freshman. He's coming from policy. Now he's doing college parley. And the first tournament he ever went to, he was in his second round. And the head coach of SIU came to Steve because Steve was in charge of like Josh, like watching him for that tournament. And he goes, "Your job for the next 3 years while you're here, Steve, is to make sure that this kid goes to class. Because if he does, we're going to win a shit ton of national championships." And then Josh Rivera went on to win like 5 national championships or something, right?
Wow.
So like, I mean, maybe you're right that he just got lucky or whatever, but like sometimes you can see it, dude. Like if you're on that level, like I'm sure that kid was. I asked like 10 questions. I'm sorry, Sasan. So go ahead and yeah.
Well, we actually have 3 questions that we want to ask everybody who we do an interview with, right?
Cool.
So, gonna ask you the 3 questions. Take a little bit of time if you want to think about the answer.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. The first thing that I want to ask, which you just touched on, which is why I want to ask it first, is who is someone who helped you in your debate career? And that can mean in whatever aspect you think is significant. Who's somebody who was a significant help to you who isn't aware of it?
Who isn't aware of it? That's a good question. I can think of a lot of people who are aware of it, but in terms of people that aren't aware of it, when you first said who's helped you out a ton, my mind instantly went to my partner senior year, Morgan. And that's the guy, I think this is actually a valid answer to your question because I don't think that he knows that he's helped me in this way because Morgan, when I was coming up at Blake, we were like friends the entire time. In fact, a couple years into high school, like mostly because of all the time we spent together in debate, we like became best friends and like we're still best friends. But until senior year, we had never been partners. And throughout, freshman through junior year, I would kind of see how Morgan is doing, and I would sort of use that as like a benchmark for myself. You know what I mean? Like I would be not in like a toxic way, but in like a, if he can do it, I know I'll do it type of way, where if, I saw him being successful, that would motivate me to go even further because in the back of my mind, we were, there actually weren't that many super committed debaters that were from my grade. There's a ton in the grade below me, and there was a ton in the grade above me, or was it the grade above me or 2 grades? I don't remember which one it was, but I was in a grade where there wasn't that much different people that were in my grade to compare myself to. And so for that reason, it was always kind of on the back of my mind where I was like, wherever Morgan is senior year, I want to be in a compatible position for that senior year. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I always was kind of envisioning that this would happen. And I think that really helped me a lot. Not only, just to like push myself, but to also think of debate in like a different sense where you're like, you have this person who's your friend. And at the same time, you're also really like invested in them getting better at debate. And that person is really invested in you getting better at debate. So it's kind of like a virtuous cycle where you're both sort of like feeding each other information and narratives that'll make you want to succeed more and will make you better. And that really throughout my high school experience helped me, I think, even more than Morgan knows. Obviously, he helped me senior year. He was fantastic as a first speaker. He was actually in octas of the TOC junior year, which like no one knows about, but he was also in octas, which is insane. But yeah, I think that would be my answer.
That's awesome. I got another one for you.
Cool.
What is everyone else in forensics wrong about?
Good question. These are tough. These are great questions.
Yeah, thank you.
It's what he does. His whole debate career was just cross-X. He was just like, tag me in, coach. Like, if he could be a designated hitter, but for cross-X, he was down.
Speaking of which,
Yeah.
what is everyone in debate wrong about? Cross-X, particularly lay and flay judges. I think that cross-X is extremely important in front of all but the most technical of judges. And the reason I don't think is like, oh, you need to like extract concessions or like necessarily nail them down. I think that cross is really important for establishing perceptual dominance and building a narrative. And I think that if you can use it to do both of those things, crossfire is, especially in front of a flay or a lay judge, as important as any other speech in the round. I think it's really, really key. And I think that if you can like really show that you know what you're talking about substantially more than the other person, that puts you in a great spot, because there is something I think in our psychology where if you have two people just standing next to each other, just arguing with each other, throwing facts back and forth, that's an extremely direct and straightforward way for the judge to see which one of you has your stuff together more, you know, which one of you is making more sense. And I think that people underrate the importance of that.
Even in my argumentation and debate class that I teach to middle schoolers, the one I teach to college students who aren't on the team, right, because I'm a professor too, and definitely when I teach the team, I have a slide, and it says cross-X, and it says the purpose of cross-X is to appear to be the debater with the best understanding of the round. And what people do not seem to get, and that I don't know how this is possible at this point, is the only time in the entire debate where you and this person are actually talking, like actually arguing. Otherwise, it's just you had, like, you played your Yu-Gi-Oh cards, they played their Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and then, yeah, you're talking to the judge at the same time. It's the only time where you can, like, actually make them seem dumb or make you seem smart or whatever it is you're trying to do. And people are just sitting there the whole time trying to do, like, the pit of doom. Like you're saying, like, all they do in cross-X is, like, so do you affect Israel? And you're like, I guess I do. And they're like, got it! Like, they're just trying to do gotcha debate. But it's perception. The team that looks like they are winning is always going to win a close debate at a minimum. And so it is free points. It's just, people, please.
Yeah, I appreciate you co-signing the video I made on cross-X. There's a whole slide on there.
It's so crazy.
One other thing I would say about cross-X and about tech judges in general is that I don't think they're as objective as most people think. I think that at the end of the day, someone who's a super like tech judge, tech over truth, they're a human too, right? And if you're a human being, you have no choice but to recognize which person is more competent and to probably change your train of thought in response to that other thought. I think that is a inevitable human behavior when you recognize one of these debaters is more competent than the other. And cross-X is, like you said, the best way to show that. And I think that there's also this thing where cross-X is important in tech debates in that it really lets you examine your internal link story, right? And so I think the best example of this ever is TOC finals my junior year. We're in second cross, and I think that this is one of the places in which I use cross like the best at any point in my career. My strategy in this rebuttal was to like try and essentially frontline like my entire case to make first summary extremely difficult, but as a consequence, my frontlining in that round was not that good. Like I did not explain myself how I wanted to in my head, right? That's something that I would do occasionally. Like I just would have this thing where like, oh, this makes so much sense in my head. And sometimes I just wouldn't translate it perfectly. I think I got better at that senior year, but I guess that's besides the point. What happened in this cross is that on the second contention about Indo-Pak war, I hadn't quite fully warranted out some of the front lines I had made, right? And so what happened in second cross is that We spent 2 minutes on Indo-Pak War, and the entire time was literally just me explaining every single argument I had made frontlining in second rebuttal, and it's final, so all 3 of the judges are paying attention. You know, it's not like what happens now, which like oh, tech judges think they're like too cool for cross, they just like watch football on their phones. That's happened to me a lot.
Steve does that during the actual round too, just for the record. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the multitasking skills are good,
he's just an asshole. I love him, but he's an asshole. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, either way, that let me get away with, I don't think, warranting my second rebuttal that well. But since all the judges were listening, now they know what I'm talking about, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if I didn't explain myself well enough in rebuttal, now they know, you know? And that's incredibly useful. That's almost like having an extra minute of a speech, you know, just to explain yourself.
And what most people do is the exact opposite. Rather than clearly explain their case, they try to obfuscate because they're so worried about giving the other team a link that they like just try and hide their case. Or like, well, I don't even think that question makes sense. It's like, no, dude, just explain your argument and you get to win.
Right.
But go ahead.
Novices ask the worst questions of all time, where they're like, "You said that this happens. Can you explain how?" Like,
right? I'd love to.
Yeah. I would love to speak more about my case. I wasn't planning on really saying anything in response to your answer like this, but I think another aspect of what you're talking about that's really you were talking about how even the tech judges, you know, are human beings that are affected by this perception of who's supposed to win. I think in a lot of ways they're affected more, or at the very least just as much. And what people don't take into consideration is how nervous judges are. Like, lay judges are nervous because they don't know if they're doing the activity right. Tech judges or whatever are nervous because it's the TOC finals. And if you make the bad decision, then you're going to be that judge that made the wrong decision, right? Even if it's not TOC finals, like, I've had people, like, coaches come up to me after a round, after I've given my decision, and try to, like, challenge me on my decision and shit like that. And people, whether it's likely to happen or not, people are really averse to that happening to them. Right. And one of the results of that is if there's a team that's clearly supposed to win, right? Like, even before the round has happened, if you're the team that's supposed to win, you just have an easier time winning. And cross-X, if the judge doesn't already have in their mind who's supposed to win, is one of the easiest places to signal, like, look, we're making arguments, there's evidence, there's all that, but just to be clear, I'm the one that's supposed to win. And if the judge thinks that, you have to lose by a mile.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
School rep has a lot to do with that. When Paul and I were competing for our community college, we had no reputation in any way, right? So if we were going to beat a 4-year school that was supposed to be good, like, sometimes we think that we deserve the win, but you'd have to win by a mile for a judge to feel comfortable saying, like, this random team from a community college I've never heard of just beat, I don't know, University of Nevada, Reno, or something that was, like, regionally a powerhouse at the time.
What's crazy too is that, like, once you have one team that, like, gets through and, like, does something big, it just rises, like, sort of the rising tide, you know, it helps all ships or whatever that quote is that I can't remember now. But yeah, oh yeah, absolutely though. But it's like, you know, just sort of this idea that, like, it's now okay. Like, judges need to know that it is okay to vote for you in close rounds or whatever. That they're not going to have to explain this decision to the coach of, you know, whichever school it is.
That's supposed to win. Nobody questions it. Even if you think you're right, if you vote for the side that wasn't supposed to win, people are going to have questions.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, that's really true. I think, but at the same time, I also think that there's this sort of, like, other effect that is going on in the minds of judges where you also don't want to be the judge that reps out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's also this pressure to, like, not do that, or at least think hard before you do it. Certainly on balance, I think the name Blake helps a lot in PF in that area. Obviously, I have no idea how many rounds.
It depends on the context,
but
it depends on the context, right? If you're in a TOC final, then it might hurt you more than it helps you.
Exactly.
But if you're a freshman novice Blake debater against a freshman novice Las Lomas High School debater, which is where I went to high school. Like, there's a clear, like, okay, like Las Lomas has got to win by a lot for me to be like, but
that's true.
So I have one more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one more question out of the three. Yeah. If you were to start your debate career all over again, and you wanted to speed run to the level of skill that you reached at the end of your debate career, how would you approach it?
Well, first of all, I would have started in middle school.
Cutting out. Sorry?
Oh, well, I said, first of all, I would have started in middle school.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, this reminds me, I'm working with these two 8th graders, and they literally, this team is as good of a team at weighing as any high school team I've ever seen. And that made me think, like, wow, I wonder what could have happened if I had started this in like 6th grade, So I think I would have started in middle school for sure.
100%.
I think that's feels like a little bit of like a cop out because yeah, obviously you have like extra time. But I think that if I had to improve any of my like behaviors or strategies to like get to the level I'm at, I think that I would have forced myself to rely less on cards as a freshman and a sophomore, because I talked about earlier how I had the advantage of being, like having that, like policy LD influence in, how I learned debate. Mm-hmm. There is also it's a double-edged sword. There's another side to that, which is that you tend to rely more on cards than your own logic and ability to just think of analytical, like rebuttal type stuff right on the spot. So I would have definitely spent more time just relying on what I can think of on the spot and less just like reading a like fat card, like freshman year. Because freshman year, I would mostly just like make a little argument and then like read a card and then make an argument and then read a card. And there really wasn't much, independent strategic thinking that has nothing to do with evidence or logical rebuttal type stuff involved. It took me, I think, until junior year to really develop that skill. So
yeah,
I've got 2 things for you, and then we'll actually cut it because we've been out 2 hours. By the way, dude, we are so appreciative. This has been fantastic. This is like I thought this was gonna be dope. This has been way doper than I thought, dude. Like you seem like a really cool kid and all that stuff.
Hey, I'm really glad I was here. This has been awesome. Yeah.
2 things for you. Number 1. So from when we talked, it sounded like you were taking like potentially a gap year or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And my question is, are you planning on competing in college, or because a lot of high schoolers, the vast majority who compete in high school, actually don't compete in college, which is very odd or strange. And if you are not going to, is that a question of you don't want to, or is it because I'm planning on going to this school and they don't really do a format that I'm interested in, or college debate for you? What's your sort of take on it or whatever?
Yeah, I'm actually undecided. I don't know. I'm leaning towards not doing it. But yeah, so I guess just to explain my college situation. So I'm on a gap year this year because I was supposed to be studying in Ireland for 2 years, and like it was like a hybrid model. So I was like, what's the point of being in Ireland if my classes are online, So like that's why I did the gap year. But that's the school called Trinity College Dublin, mm-hmm. And the only format in college that I was considering doing was British parliamentary, which is a far cry from like tech debate. But I want to do that because I didn't want to spend the time outside of debate anymore. I just like I have a lot of other things that I'm interested in trying to do, and I didn't want to. I don't want to spend that time, so I wouldn't do anything that required that sort of thing. What?
You want to be a college kid. You want to have college
exactly
social life and activities and clubs and yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Hopefully that's like possible once I'm there. Hopefully COVID isn't still happening. But no, that's
fingers crossed,
100%. That was my train of thought. But to answer your question, I think that me not doing debate is kind of like partially like I want to have a life thing. But I think it's also because I have the incredibly rare privilege of approaching debate with the irrational perspective of I need to accomplish these ridiculous goals or I won't be satisfied. I have had the luck of accomplishing those goals. And I realize that if I get into BP, that cycle is going to start over.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to decide I really want to win Worlds Finals because like I can predict. I think that's a pretty predictable thing for me to do at this point. And I don't really want to go through the whole process again because first of all, I doubt I'd be as fortunate. And second of all, because I do feel satisfied and really happy with my career. I think that I had a lot of blessings, a lot of great fortune, made a lot of friends, learned a lot of stuff. I do feel like in some ways I would be totally content walking away. The only reason I would miss it is just because of how fun I still think it is. You know, like I really just still love like the feeling of like giving a great, you know, speech to end a round. It's so fun. But I think that the best choice would be to call it quits.
There's certain people I talk to who are like high school debaters, and I'm like, God, I wish this kid did like college, like NPDA style parlay at some point, like just to see what that transition would be like, because it is non-evidentiary and it is so analytical. The last thing I have for you is
real quick.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What I think is so cool about community college debate is it's usually not a trade-off with the college experience. It's your kind of closest version of the college experience. Most community college kids are just to their classes, going home, don't really have like a social thing on campus. But I totally agree that going in freshman year we had a bunch of kids that transferred to UC Berkeley. We're on the debate team, and that's a debate team that I respect a lot, but they'd just gotten to the Haas School of Business, and last thing they want to do is spend every minute of every day in this niche activity. But so I get that. Paul?
Last thing I had for you. Are there any round recordings that you think everyone who does PF or does debate needs to watch and that they can glean something from it? And part 2 of that question is, at a later date, would you like to come back and do a round analysis with us of that round or some other round?
Yeah, so to answer the second one first, yeah, sure, I would love to. I'm busy. I'm pretty
whenever, dude, whenever. It was so fun.
We
upload videos like once a year.
Yeah, dude, don't worry about it.
It's a very lax schedule.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that I can't say that there's like one specific round that I think encapsulates like, you know, like everything that I think that someone should see. And I'm also really biased towards my own rounds. Like, I feel like I don't want to come off as self-serving because I think I'm probably going to be recommending my own rounds only because I don't really have memorized any other like rounds online that I like have watched. So I don't really have like a great memory of like if like this round like
it's a curse. Trust me, it's a curse. You don't want this. I remember all of Sasan's rounds and he doesn't.
I remember every one of my rounds. I remember like one round. Well, so I mean, I think what round of yours would you recommend people watch?
Yeah. So I think that I think TOC Finals this year would be a good one.
Great round.
And the reason is that I think that the Wang debate in summaries and final focuses is really interesting. I think that the way that like the different like link Wang mechanisms interact is really kind of like uncommon for a PF round. I don't think that you hear that many rounds that go like that in depth on link Wang. And I think that got to happen because like, you know, Westlake, they're fantastic. And we have like a similar understanding of how those things work. So I think that debate is really interesting for link Wang. That's one. The other one is one that we lost. It was Blake Finals. And the reason that people should watch this has nothing to do with me and everything to do with Suckham. He is the second speaker on University, and he gives the most brilliant rebuttal that like, and also Sai gave a fire summary. I mean, they did something which is this round, the way they responded is essentially the perfect way to respond to a semi-straight turn rebuttal that is not to be self-serving, but very good, very thorough. We fully prepped their case out. They did like a masterful job in this round. I mean, they just straight up just like bamboozled us into they bamboozled their way into victory in that round. And I mean, great strategy by them in that round. They're really great debaters.
That's a serious skill that I've recently been trying to come up with a video concept on, which is sort of like these moments where it appears that you are screwed, and like how does one come back from that in debate. Dude, this was really cool. I don't know what else you got, Sasan.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, we started. Sounds like Paul reached out to you after he saw that post you made on Reddit.
Yeah.
And you were talking about how you're interested in coaching. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about what kind of work you're interested in doing, and if somebody wants to reach out to you, how to best do that.
For sure, yeah. So what I'm doing right now is I'm doing fully online private coaching. I'm doing both like out of tournament coaching where we might do topic prep or like skill development by doing drills, things like that. And I'm also doing some in tournament coaching. I have like different rates for that and everything. But yeah, I mean, I do have the advantage of being on a gap year, so I have a very flexible schedule. And if anyone is interested in reaching out, shoot me an email at jackdebateemail@gmail.com. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on that.
Yeah, you should do that. If you have the ability to do that, whoever you are watching this video. Like, yeah, like we have like 3-hour videos where there's like 2 minutes of stuff we say that actually matters. I feel like it's probably a good trade-off here. I also wanted to say that as we've noted, we are super duper appreciative of you having reached out and being into Proteus or whatever, at least back in the day. And I just want to say that if there's anyone else out there, like regardless of your skill level, you do not have to win the TOC. You do not have to do PF if you're a coach, if you're a competitor. If you'd like to talk to us and you think you have like a cool take on debate or just, I don't know, want to shoot the shit, think we're all right dudes or whatever, we're all about that. Yeah, I mean, because I really feel that, and I've noticed this from the debate Discord and from the debate subreddit, there is such a perception amongst the majority of competitors that the people who are at the very top are not just high school kids or not just college kids like them or whatever, that they're not the same, that they shouldn't approach them or talk to them or ask them questions like, I'm going to look like an idiot if I ask them questions. And like, I assure you that is probably not the case. Jack in particular seems like a really nice dude, but busy, so be sparing or whatever. But with that said, if you are the kind of person who wants to help out others in the community and who want like to contribute to that in some way, but don't necessarily have like a platform or whatever, not that we have a significant platform or whatever, you could tweet into the void and get the same amount of responses. But yeah, like we just think it's really important that people in this activity get to share their stories and their perspectives and their approaches, and that it kind of humanizes you for other people, and that's a really great thing to do.
Jack, we'll let you get the last word. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, nothing major. I just say thank y'all a lot for having me on. This is a great time. You guys ask fire questions. So anyone else who wants to come on, you better be ready. You better like have your A game.
The next person, we're just like prepped out. Like, okay. Hey, we watched this round from your sophomore year, and you dropped the land. I'm just.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, dude. Really appreciate it. Have a great day, dude. Talk to you later.
Take care. Oh, and if there's anything we can offer you in terms of just advice coaching or anything like that, I know you all know your shit with like public forum, but in terms of any issues you ever run into, please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, don't be a stranger, dude.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
All right.
Sounds good.
Gonna stop the recording now. Bye, everyone. Have a good one.